thanks for joining me. I want to share with you some of the things that I've learned about borrowing money. Now, I've learned these things over the last 40 years, and they have helped me borrow over $3.1 billion, that's a billion with a B, dollars in 120 different transactions from 180 different lenders. So these are things that worked 40 years ago and worked 4 months ago. So it doesn't matter whether you're in good times or bad times. These are techniques that you can use to borrow any kind and type of money you need for your business, irrespective of the business you're in. Because I've started 7 different businesses in 7 different industries. I've never used 1 penny of my own money in starting a business. I've been able to borrow, again, $3.1 billion, every drop of it for privately held startup companies. Some of those companies were days old or even hours old, and I was still able to borrow money using these techniques. The first thing I want to talk about are the basics, and these are just the basics of borrowing. And to me, they're so very, very simple, but if you haven't borrowed money, then quite frankly, they can sound kind of intimidating to you, but they're just the simple little things that everybody needs to think about when they go to a lender. And when I use the word lender, it can be a bank, it can be a savings loan, it can be a credit union, it can be investment bankers, it can be venture capital or vulture funds or angel funds. It doesn't make any difference. Any lender, anybody who will give you money, whether they be your friends, your relatives, your neighbors, or a professional, are going to be looking at these same basics. Now, and part of the process here is to understand that borrowing money is a learned skill. It's just a thing you have to learn how to do. And most of us aren't very good at it the first time we try. It's kind of like the first time we tried to ride a bike or the first time we tried to drive a car. Now, both of those were really awkward and uncomfortable circumstances. But soon we learned that riding a bike really wasn't that hard after you got a couple of the basics down. And driving a car, that isn't very difficult either. But if we remember back when we were 15 or 16 years old, it seemed like the most intimidating thing we could ever do. Well, when people start to borrow money, they start with a very limited background. Mostly the only time they've ever tried to borrow money is when they bought a car. Well, I'm here to tell you, when you're borrowing money to buy a car, that's really not borrowing money. The car is borrowing the money. The car is the collateral for the loan, and the people who own the car are so doggone glad to sell it that if you walk in with a pulse, you're probably going to walk out with a car. So that one really doesn't qualify. The second time most people find themselves in a borrowing situation is when they're borrowing to buy their home. Well, you aren't really borrowing the money. Mostly the collateral or the house, the real estate, is borrowing the money. You know, if the real estate doesn't have good value as compared to the loan amount, you're probably not going to get the loan. So that one really doesn't count either. So the first real time most people try to borrow money for a business is the first time they've ever really had to borrow money on their capacity, on their knowledge, on their experience, and on the things that mostly we don't know until we learn. So I'm going to teach you the 9 basic things that every borrower needs to know if they're going to try and borrow some serious money for their business. Now the first one is just, again, one of those very basic kind of things. You have to understand that lenders are very specialized. Lenders are as specialized as medical doctors are. Now, we get that when we think of medical doctors. We understand that medical doctors are different, that you wouldn't go to a brain surgeon for an ingrown toenail. You would go to a specialist. You'd go to somebody who could take care of your medical problem, whatever it was. Yet, when we think about borrowing money, we think that all lenders are generically the same. Most people come to me and they say, well, I went to my bank and my bank turned me down. And they think it's their fault. They think maybe they didn't do something right or they weren't prepared. Now, there are times when both of those are true. Maybe they didn't do something right and maybe they weren't prepared. But more often than not, people fail to borrow money because they're going to the wrong place. So basic number 1 is make sure you're going to a place that can lend money to you. Now, I'm going to tell you in a minute how you determine that before you even go, but one of the subparts of this very basic element is that lenders, whether they be your local credit union or a savings and loan or a local bank or a commercial bank or a national bank or a private bank or venture capital, a vulture fund or whatever it might be, they all have rules. And their rules dictate to whom they can lend, the amount of money they can lend, and what kind of type of industry they will lend into. So if you're at the wrong place trying to borrow for the wrong kind of money, it doesn't work. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how prepared you are. So the very first and most important part is you need to understand that you have to qualify your lender. You have to know from whom you should be trying to borrow the money. And again, I'm going to come back to this point in just a minute, but I want to go through the other basic steps as well, because every one of them is important.